When my husband and I were paying off $78,000 of debt, the thing that helped me most was hearing the stories of other people and what they'd overcome to pay off their own debt. So today I'm sharing our debt-free journey with you in hopes that the things that we've overcome will inspire and motivate you to have your own debt freedom story. Hey there, I'm Jen. I am the Chief Financial Educator at Modern Frugality, and I am passionate about helping people become debt-free and reach their financial goals faster. And so today I am doing something a little special, and I'm sharing our personal story, but mostly through the lens of all of the crap that we went through to get there. We paid off $78,000 of mostly student loan debt. 4 of it was a car, and we paid off that $78,000 in 23 months, so just under 2 years. And we were making a combined income with all of our side hustles of $88,000. So we brought home around $75,000 each year. And if you're doing the math, that's about $4,000 per month just towards debt, $4,000 of our take-home pay. And it didn't start there. It was definitely less at the beginning and more towards the end, but that is just the averages for you. And I think that might be one of the problems with debt-free stories. You hear numbers and think, oh my God, I could never ever do that. But when I hear those numbers, I'm like, wow, how did we do that with all of the crap that happened to us? And looking back, the stuff I'm calling crap wasn't actually that crappy, but in the moment, the emotions and all of the stress and everything I was feeling was so heightened. And I remember those days. And so I wanted to walk you through our story, the abbreviated version. I'm not going to keep you here all day, but I wanted to walk you through it to see how 2 really ordinary people with really not high-paying jobs could pay off all this debt so fast with absolutely no windfalls, no help from anywhere, just maybe a few bonuses of a couple $1,000s combined after, Christmas bonuses or whatever. Absolutely no significant help, just little changes, little actions done every single day. And before I start, I have a debt freedom roadmap that I've created, and you can get it for free at the link in the description or at modernfrugality.com/roadmap. And it's kind of little markers along the road to debt freedom. So you can see if you're on the right step along the journey, what you can expect moving forward, and then also maybe some detours you want to take along the way. It sounds cornier than it is, but I promise it's helpful and it's free. So head to the link in the description and get that before we get started here. So our journey starts, like many people who start paying off debt, we got married. And when we got married, Travis was unemployed. So we were newlyweds without a lot of money. We just spent most of it on our very low budget wedding. And Travis didn't have a job because he was fresh out of college. So we started at what seems like on paper the worst place that you could start. My full-time job would only give me 25 hours a week, so I was underemployed. Travis was unemployed, and we had no money or prospects. But Travis did get a job in, a few weeks or a month. It wasn't that long before he got a job, but we didn't know. He is an aircraft mechanic, and those jobs aren't just on, down the street. They're few and far between. So he did find one relatively quickly though. But we did not start at a time when you would think, oh yeah, I'm going to start paying off my debt right after I get married and my husband's unemployed. So stop waiting until the time is right to pay off your debt, because I can tell you from experience, there will be no right time. You just have to start. And a few months in, we had another setback. I decided that I didn't want to work on my spending. I just wanted to do more side hustles because I was working 25 hours a week. So I had time to do more side hustles. And I signed up for every single one you can find on the internet. And this was back in 2015. So there weren't as many options as there are today, but there were still quite a few. And I signed up for a lot of them. And after 2 months of that, I developed shingles from the stress. It was a week before Christmas. And at the ripe old age of 26, I had shingles. So that was when I realized I had to step back. My body was not physically capable of working so much extra. And honestly, I wasn't working that much more than a 40-hour per week job. So if you were already working 40 hours per week and you feel stuck and you feel like there's not enough time for you to do a side hustle or a side business, I would encourage you again, don't let that stop you. Because at that time, I was up to about 40 hours and my body told me I needed to stop as well. And ultimately, it was that setback that drove me to frugality and finding ways to save money and ultimately control my spending, because that was my bigger problem, is that I just didn't want to live in my budget. I didn't want to have something telling me what I could and could not spend money on. And so that was a blessing in disguise. So I would encourage you, if you are not yet embracing frugality, that not being able to work side hustles is not a make or break in your debt-free journey. So that brings us along the path to Travis's second bout of unemployment. So he found a job relatively quickly, but that's because it was a temporary job. And while some people did have the opportunity to stay on with that company, Travis wasn't chosen to stay on with them. So there were another few months that he was unemployed, and I wasn't able to work as many side hustles as I wanted to. So we were kind of back at square one. And this is about 6 months after we started, which was so devastating. But instead of giving up, I decided I'm a very all or nothing person. So at that point, I was like, okay, we've been doing this for 6 months. I'm all in. And so I found another way to be even more frugal. And that is when I started doing no spend challenges. And if you know anything about me, you know that I have a best-selling book called The No Spend Challenge Guide. And so again, this crazy roadblock that should have told us, hey, maybe this isn't the right time to be doing this, was what led me to discovering no spend challenges that ultimately has created an income stream for me that has exceeded what I was making in a year at that time. Like what I have made off of that one book is vastly more than my annual salary that I was making at that time. How crazy is that? So again, don't let these roadblocks stop you. So those were kind of the biggest roadblocks. And so maybe yours aren't as dramatic as those, but I think then maybe you'll be able to relate to this next season about 6 months later. So we were a year into our debt payoff. And by that time, we knew that it wasn't going to take the 5 years we initially had planned for it to take. By that time, we had saved enough and we were making enough. We'd found a steady pace. So we knew we had about a year left. But I was in such a state of, I don't want to say it's depression, but I was miserable. I had a year in and I knew I had a year to go, and I did not know if I could do what I just done for another year, guys, I was watching all of my friends go on trips and buy houses and buy cars and do all the things I wanted to do, and I felt like I was being left behind. Like, I lost friends because I had friends that all they wanted to do was spend money, and I couldn't. And I mean, on the positive side, I gained friends that didn't want to spend money. So it wasn't like I was alone, but I couldn't see that yet. Like, I can see it in hindsight, but I didn't see that in the moment. A year in was a really, really tough time for me mentally. So nobody told me to do this, but I thought, hey, maybe if I help other people learn what I have been learning over the past year, maybe that will make me feel better about going through this. And so that's how I started my first blog. I started writing, and people did find it helpful. And then that little side hustle took off into my now full-time career. And so I didn't see it at the time, but that struggle completely transformed my life. And while, yes, had you given me $80,000, I would have paid off my debt for sure. But I can almost say, like, right now, I'm thankful for having gone through that struggle. Would I do it again? Absolutely no. But having gone through it one time has been one of my life's biggest blessings. So take with that what you will. And bring other people along with you. Lift others up with you, and it will only bring you up higher. That's the moral of that story, I guess. So after that was a year in, and I think maybe a month or two after that, we had been living in really affordable housing, but our landlord decided it was too affordable, so he gave us 6 weeks to leave so he could turn it into an Airbnb. Yeah, like raising our rent wasn't even an option. And we realized why when we actually got into the rental market in our city. So we decided we didn't want to rent for a whole nother year, because that was the first thing we wanted to do after we paid off our debt, was buy a house. And at that point we were so close. We were about 6 months away from what we thought. And so we stopped our debt payoff journey for a few months, and we bought a house. And some people would say that's not a good idea, but here are the two things it did for us. So first, it wasn't the most financially, like mathematically smart idea, because while we were paying off our debt, we had amazing credit scores, but we had no down payment, so we had a really high interest rate. So it wasn't good on that end. But what it did for us was that it made us buy a less expensive home than what maybe we would have purchased after we were debt-free and had a lot of time to look. So we were in a time crunch. We were looking real cheap because of where we were financially, and we got something that ultimately I love. I love this house. It's the nicest house I've ever lived in, but way cheaper than what our friends were buying at the same time, who at that point had more debt than us. So ultimately it worked out in our favor, because our mortgages are $40,000, $50,000 less than theirs, and we have about the same equity. So it did help us in that sense, and if I could go back and do it all over again, I'd probably, even with hindsight, still buy a house while we were paying off debt. It just worked for us. So don't be afraid of doing that. Don't think you can't do that while you're saving and while you're paying off debt. And then the last real kicker came about a month after we closed on our house. So we moved out of our apartment within a month. 30 days after we got that call, we were in our house, and so that was a quick close. But a month after that, my mom told me that she was losing my childhood home. And so while that didn't affect us financially directly, I remember watching the appliances from my household kitchen, the kitchen I grew up in, drive away in somebody else's car. I remember selling almost everything from my childhood home. And that took a mental toll. If you've ever experienced a foreclosure, especially of the house you grew up in, it's not something you just walk through and don't think about. Those memories will stay with me for the rest of my life. And they seriously impact the financial advice I give to people, because I don't want other children to have to experience that from their parents. So that was a devastating, that was a traumatic period of my life. And one that anybody would have said, hey, why don't you take some time off? Why don't you pause this and take some time for self-care? And if I could go back, the only thing I would change is setting aside some money to get some counseling. That's the only thing that I would change. But I kept running because I didn't want my future children to experience the pain and the responsibility that I felt as being an only child and walking my mom through this. And some people might argue, like, yeah, that wasn't your responsibility, you didn't have to do that. But I mean, what child in their right mind would not help their parent through a tough time like that? Like, it's just what having empathy is. So, highly recommend talking to your parents about their financial state, as a side note. But yeah, that was in March, April of 2017. And then several months later, in August of 2017, August 30th, we made our final payment on Travis's student loans. And through that, having something at least every 6 months or every 3 months come up and try to knock us down, it didn't work. We kept going. And I know that anybody, like, we're not special, anybody on this path can do what we did. I'm 100% sure of that. It may not take you 23 months. Like, you may have to do it in your own time, in your own way, but I know that you can do it, because I look back and I see there was nothing special about us. Nothing. So I hope that story inspired you to keep writing your own debt-free story. Don't forget to head to modernfrugality.com/roadmap so that you can get a little bit more insight into the things that I was talking about in expecting road bumps and roadkill along your path to debt freedom. But it's absolutely worth it. We've been debt-free for 3 years at this point. We built $100,000 net worth with the equity in our home a year later, and now we have over $100,000 saved for retirement between us, and we're on the path to having $100,000 each. So totally worth it. Wouldn't change it for the world. Wouldn't do it again. But that's why I do what I do, and I make these videos to help other people get debt-free faster. So definitely subscribe to the channel if that's something you want, and I will see you in the next video.